Hello and welcome to another late night chat. My guest this evening is Anna Stevens.
Hello.
Hello.
It's Anna Stevens. Hello.
Hello. So tonight we're going to be talking about writing, books, and whatever else we want to, really. And we've got some questions from people as well. But let's go back to the beginning. What got you into reading fantasy, and then what got you into writing it?
Ooh. See, this is what happens when somebody doesn't send you the questions in advance.
True.
I'm really glad I've got a gin and tonic. What?
Me too. A bottle of glass of vodka.
A pint glass of vodka.
What? No. Yes. What? Go
on. Okay. What got me into reading fantasy? I've just always had a really weird imagination. To be honest, I've always been. It's one of the things that my parents have always said ever since I was really little. I always loved having stories told to me, and then as soon as I was like 4 or 5, I started telling stories to them. I think probably like a lot of young kids, I was animal mad for a long time.
Right.
And there were a lot back in like the mid 80s, there were a lot of kids books that had animal protagonists that I read. And I always think that they are a type of fantasy. I mean, you've got animals talking to each other and wearing waistcoats and stuff like that. That's pretty fantastical. So I think it went from there. And then there was a book, there's a book called Anna Witch, which I read probably when I was about 6 or 7. And obviously I picked it up from the library because it had my name on the cover. And it was a story about this young witch who's not very good at magic. And I always remember it because, 1, because her name was Anna, and 2, because it explained why witches wear pointy hats. And it's because witches' hair floats.
Okay, that's an explanation I've never heard before. So it makes
exactly. So I absolutely fell in love with this book. I mean, partly because it had my name, and she shared my name, and partly because I loved the story. I think there was a talking owl, and it just had a lot of different things. But it kind of showed me that you could have stories about people that were interesting, and not just stories about animals and stuff like that. And then I think after that, the next one I found that really stuck with me was Dragonflight, Anne McCaffrey.
Right.
So once I hit Dragonflight, that was it. I must have read about 8 or 9 of hers, just straight through in succession. And that was pretty much it for me. So Anna Witch and Dragonflight were my 2.
I remember a series of books when I was a kid about, not this wasn't Wind in the Willows, this was something else. It was a group of various animals, foxes and badgers, and they were going on a journey, and they all spoke to each other.
The Animals of Farthing Wood?
Maybe.
It probably scarred you for life. Terrible things happen in the Animals of Farthing Wood. I think their home is basically going to be developed, and they build like a road around the hill and this, that, and the other, and I think
sounds familiar.
Mrs. Hedgehog gets run over, and it's trauma. It's like Watership Down for my generation.
Still hurts 30 years later. That's all I'm saying.
It just traumatized everyone at my school who'd read it. They were all like, "Have you read this book?" Which may explain why I write the way I write now. It's all because of the Animals of Farthing Wood.
You're passing the trauma on to other people.
Indeed. Pay it forward.
Yes.
That's my belief.
Share it. Yeah.
Share
I think it was something like that. I just worked my way through the children's section in the local library, and they were in there for sure.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. They were super, super traumatic. And I think there might even have been a sequel, but probably with a much smaller cast of animals, because a lot of them got killed.
And whittled down on the journey.
Yeah, precisely. And then I did obviously read Watership Down, which didn't probably didn't traumatize me as much as the cartoon.
Yeah.
Which, you know,
Mm-hmm.
let's not even go through the cartoon.
Bright eyes.
And then I also read The Plague Dogs, which was by the same author.
I've not heard of that one before.
And it's about 2 dogs that escape from an animal testing facility.
Oh, wow.
That one is much darker and a lot more grown up. And they're all scarred and limping. And one of them has basically been driven insane medication that's been pumped into him. It was way too old a book for me to have read, but I was like, oh, it's the same author as Watership Down. This will be fine. Yeah.
Dark. Very dark.
So yeah, that was interesting. The Plague Dogs. What's it? Is it Richard Adams, the author?
I don't know. I'd have to Google it.
Anyway, yeah. Look it up if you're feeling masochistic in any way.
No. There's been enough trauma from my childhood, it seems. I thought I got away fairly unscarred, but now you're bringing it all back.
You've just repressed it.
I have. Wow. Dark. Oof. I mean, there's enough talking animals in all the C.S. Lewis books with, you know, people in waistcoats and Alice in Wonderland and the rabbit in clothes and the hare and all that kind of stuff. A lot of talking animals when we were kids. The more I look back on it, and Aslan, more trauma there. But
maybe they're well, yes. maybe it's more relatable when you're a kid. A talking animal. I mean, what other animal tragedies are there? I mean, there's clearly Arturo in Neverending Story.
Still
Atreyu. Sorry.
I can't. I've seen some of the best cosplays, and they still hurt.
Yes. Is it just the person and then
we can't talk about it. It's too. If you've never seen it,
I've never seen it in the flesh. I've seen photos of that cosplay, and it is evil.
If you've never seen Neverending Story and you have children, don't show it to them until they're at least 15. That's my advice. That way they'll sleep at night, and you won't have to, you know, listen to them cry themselves to sleep for months. Just saying. Any bedwetting that they had might suddenly come back. It's just possible.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway, moving on. What got you into writing fantasy?
Always wanted to be a writer. Always, as I said, you know, loved telling stories when I was a kid. Always, you know, had a pretty wild imagination. Fantasy was the biggest genre that I read. It was the one that I loved the most. So when I decided that I was going to try and, you know, take it a bit more seriously, it was really a no-brainer that it was going to be fantasy that I delved into first. I do have a very, very bad sci-fi novel hidden on my hard drive, which will probably never see the light of day. It's 90% sure it will never see the light of day. It was written a long time ago, back when I thought that the only way you could write was by cramming in every single cliche and metaphor and trope, and everything had to be highly melodramatic from start to finish. So it's basically the whole thing is just at like a pitch of about here. Like there's no peaks and troughs, there's no quiet moments. It's all just for like 120,000 words. Oof. So no. Fantasy just I don't know, I find it easier than other genres, probably because I've had so much experience of reading it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It was the same thing that called to me. I never wanted to write anything else. It just seemed natural that fantasy would be where I started with. It just I've read other books, but I never thought of writing. Now I have later in life, but at the time when I first started, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't write fantasy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can read, like Stuart Turton's The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Read it, absolutely loved it. It's the weirdest, twistiest, most bonkers, head-hopping time travel murder mystery. But I would literally die if I had to write something like that. I can't even begin to work out how he might have done it. Like
Right.
from an objective craft point of view.
Yeah.
I can just look at it and go, nope, absolutely not. I would need like a mile-long wall and an infinite number of Post-it notes and lots of string, and it would be like that gif of that guy trying to explain stuff. No, madness. The thing that I love about fantasy is that you can make it as complex as you want, but also a very simple storyline can do an awful lot of emotional lifting in fantasy. So yeah, and I'm inherently lazy, so it's easy to just go with things that are slightly easier for me to write.
Do you plan then? Because you just talked about whiteboards and stuff, or do you make it up as you go along?
I tend to have, I know the start and I know the ending, and I know probably 3 or 4 major events
Right.
in the middle. But as for how we get to each of those points, that tends to be a fairly organic.
Right.
I also write for Black Library for their Age of Sigmar stuff, and they tend to like far more detailed briefs.
Right.
And you have to, and they're very much, this is a synopsis we've signed off. So this is the book that you're, or the novella or short story that you're going to turn in.
Yeah.
So that has been quite interesting for me, because I've got a novella coming out with them soon, and I had to write an entire synopsis, and they wanted so much more information than I would give for even a novel, and then I had to stick to it, and I was like, oh my god, I don't do this kind of thing. So it was really interesting as an intellectual exercise.
Yeah. So one thing I found that when I was first trying to get an agent, everything is all focused on that first novel. And just sort of talking more, general advice for other writers. It's all about that first novel. You're working on it and working on it, and you get it, as best as you can. And then hopefully an agent says yes. And then when you got your first agent, it obviously ended up being the Godblind trilogy. How much of the third and the second novel had you planned or written when you got the agent, and then when you got your publisher? Like, I had 4 paragraphs for book 2 and had 2 lines written for book 3. So when they sort of said, here's first the book Battle Mage, what's the trilogy? Oh, it's called called Age of Darkness, and this happens in book 2, and then this happens in book 3. And they were like, fine. Because it's all about that first book. Everything is the first book until it's so far along in edits, and then they go, so how are you getting on in book 2? And at that point I thought I should start
writing. Planning, not even writing, just planning.
How much did you have on your books 2 and 3 of Godblind?
I think for me, because I'd been writing and rewriting Godblind for many years. I did have a really good idea of what was going to happen in both the sequels, because I'd literally spent so much time working on the first book, that I was convinced I knew exactly what was going to happen. And so when my agent asked for a synopsis for the other 2 books, I had probably about 2,000 words. I was just like, yeah, there you go, that's what's going to happen. He was like, okay, people don't do that kind of thing. Why, what kind of weirdo are you? And I was like, oh, I've been writing Godblind on and off for 13 years. I kind of know where it's going. And he was like, okay, that's fine. And then when we got the publisher, he sent the draft of Godblind, and then he sent this synopsis off for the other 2 books. And the editor was like, I've never seen a synopsis for sequels that's quite that detailed. That's amazing. And then the books turned out to be very little like that massively detailed synopsis anyway, as per my previously stated inability to stick to a plan. So I'd spent, a decade crafting the perfect arc.
Yep.
And then we just went, I want that bit and that bit. Get rid of the rest. And that and that was it. So then I just winged both the sequels, which was a terrible idea. And I'm doing it in this trilogy, and as I've already stated, that's a terrible idea. So kids, plan your books.
Don't do what she does. Do what she
do what
says.
I say.
Yeah.
So I'm extremely wasteful is probably the best way to say it.
Right.
So The Stone Knife is my new book. It is the longest by far of any book I've written so far. And I have a document called Cut Scenes, which is 140,000 words long.
How long was the first draft?
About 130,000 words.
Hang on, but it went up to...
the finished book is 173.
So you added like 50,000 words on your first draft. Wow, that's a lot.
Well, I mean, theoretically, I probably added about 100,000 because I cut an awful lot back out, which is why my cut document is the length of a long book.
Is any of it useful at all? Like for anything? Short stories or?
I mean, I've kept it all, which is good, and I think a lot of it might inform the sequels, but a lot of it for me is just character development and plot development and world. So it's almost like for me, I need to write it in order to know the characters better.
Yeah.
Because if I just had them like a paragraph on each character on a document, I wouldn't know them well enough. So I write all of this stuff that never ever sees publication. But it helps me understand the characters. So I suppose in that respect, it's not a waste of time. Who am I kidding? It's a massive waste of time. It's just my process. It's just my process. I wouldn't recommend it.
If it works,
it
as part of
works,
your process.
but yeah, it is highly wasteful.
I tend to discover them as I go along, but it almost sounds like you want to know them more before you get further into the book.
I think I would say probably 40% of my first draft gets cut. So
Right.
I write the whole first draft. That's how I learn what it is I'm actually trying to write. So that's how I learn who the characters are and which parts of the story it is I want to be telling. So then I'll cut all of that 40% out. And then by the time I've gone through that, I feel like I know the characters. So then I can start putting back in and developing things in a more sort of three-dimensional, so that they feel more real.
Yeah.
But yeah, I pretty much have to write an entire draft before I know what it is I'm actually trying to write.
Yeah. Even with planning a book, I have to finish the draft before I know what the story's actually about. Well, there's the story, and then there's what the book is about, and then and there's a difference. You don't always know what the book's about, even when you know the story. And then you go back and go, well, that doesn't need to be there. Why would it? That's nothing to do with this. It's just part of the natural editing process, I think.
Yeah, and then obviously it goes to my agent, and he'll have some thoughts, and he'll probably tease out a couple of bits, and he's like, "Is this what you're actually trying to talk about?" And I'm like, Yes.
Yes, let's say that.
It is. Let's pretend that was exactly what I was going for.
Yes, absolutely. Suddenly, yes, that was what I was thinking. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And then it will go to my editor and he'll do exactly the same thing. He's like, oh, I really like this element of it. Can we bring this out a bit? And I'm like, yeah, I was thinking that.
Absolutely, yes. I'm glad you've seen what I was going for.
I've got that noted down. I was definitely doing that.
I always find it weird when people find things or they see things that I don't think are there. It's not that that they read between the lines, but they say, oh, I love the way that this character is motivated by something very dark. And I'm thinking, what? What? I didn't get that. And I wrote the character. I just sort of think, then it makes me go back and question things again. And I go, is that right? And if it's not, then I have to fix it so that they don't then say that the next draft.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's that little there's that meme that goes around every so often, isn't there, about like when you're in English class at school, and the teacher says, see, now the author wrote that the curtains were blue because it is a sign of the character's melancholy, and it is a critique on blue collar society and whatever. And the author's there going, no, the curtains are just fucking blue. It's not that important, But it is interesting when you'll get someone say, I really love how you did that. And you're like, do I admit that I don't know what they're talking about? Or do I admit that that is just a total fluke? Or do I just go, yes, indeed. Yes, thank you.
If they make you sound really smart, then you go, oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it when people find themselves reflected in the characters, but when they find something that isn't there as far as I know and I wrote it, that's when I get kind of puzzled and I think, this is why I need to have other people read the book sometimes before it goes anywhere. And then they go, huh? So like on my new book that's coming out next year, a lot of initial comments were, oh, it's really funny. And both me and my agent were there going, funny? Why is everyone saying it's funny? It's not a comedy. And we had to kind of go back and look at it, and we're still not sure.
Oh, okay.
Funny. I don't get it.
Is it very black humoured, perhaps?
There's a couple of touches, but apart from that, not really. So I still don't.
Wow.
We don't get it. We've both just gone. It's not bloody Benny Hill. They're not chasing people around at double speed and slapstick. And I'm just like, funny. I don't know. Maybe it's the way I write. Maybe it's just my sense of humor is coming through. But I don't know. Look, this time next year, funny new book.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to it now.
Oh, great! Thanks. Yeah, funny.
New comic fantasy, Stephen Aryan. He's like, what?